study,
and play come together on a Windows 11 PC.
And for a limited time, college students get
The best of both worlds.
Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
This is the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello,
No. Welcome back to Tudors Dynasty podcast. It's the moment no one has been waiting for. It's time for a bit more Matt Lewis. And I'm not waiting for an insult this time. I'm doing the intro. So your very quiet host is going to be Rebecca Larson. She thinks I'm an absolute delight. She's not wrong. I'm taking over this episode. Yes, that's right. This stupid face is running this episode. I am the revolting peasant that this podcast has been waiting for. So there you go. What do you think? I'm revolting, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, Rebecca, here's your chance to input a little bit, very, very briefly, because obviously everyone wants to get back to me talking. Very, very briefly, what would you like to talk about in this episode?
You just threw me for a loop there. I was not expecting that at all.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks, Matt. Thanks for that lovely introduction.
I feel like I deserved it.
You did earn that one. And you know what? I had such a good insult for you this week too, but we'll have to save that for next time, I guess, huh?
No, do it anyway. Go on, then you can think of another one for next time.
Okay. All right. Well, this one it seems totally appropriate. I was going to say, so Matt Lewis has returned, clinging to this podcast harder than Richard III clung to that car park.
Oof. Oof. Like it.
I had to do it. Richard III had to come in there eventually, right?
Absolutely. It's about time.
It is. Okay, so speaking of Richards, let's get into this. So last week we did Richard II, and we ended that episode. So at that point, John of Gaunt was dead. Richard was in a bunch of trouble because his cousin Henry IV invaded and suddenly had all of this backing for people who wanted him to take over, and Richard II essentially became captive at that point. And I think that's where we left off, wasn't it?
I think we just about got Henry crowned. So yeah, towards the end of 1399, the end of September, we get this idea that Richard II willingly, in air quotes, gave up his crown to Henry. A bunch of articles of deposition are presented to Parliament to explain why Richard shouldn't be king anymore and why it should be Henry instead. Henry's main potential rival as a claimant to the throne is about a 7-year-old boy at the moment, Edmund Mortimer. So surprise, surprise, he keeps quiet. I don't think he was even invited. So Henry's like, anybody else? No, just me.
Carry on.
So on the 1st of October 1399, Richard II is formally deposed. Henry is named as king, and 13th of October, just under a fortnight later, he is crowned at Westminster Abbey. So at this point, Richard, just to finish off his story, at this point he's moved to Pontefract Castle as a prisoner, so up in the north of England, up in Yorkshire. And in the early weeks of 1400, so a few months after he's been deposed, Henry faces his first rebellion, which is known as the Epiphany Rising. And this is several people who were close to Richard, it's a number of earls, essentially, who were close to Richard, because some of the nobility had done quite well out of Richard's reign. They'd all got promoted to dukedoms and all that kind of thing, that ducati that we saw Richard creating towards the end of his reign last time. And Henry is coming in and taking all of that back. And some of them are like, oh,
I just got this.
Yeah. So there is a bunch of them who sort of lay this plot to kill Henry IV at a tournament at Windsor. But he gets wind of it. So their plan is to kill Henry and restore Richard. Henry gets wind of it, has all of these men arrested. And then we get the news coming from Pontefract that on the 14th of February, 1400, happy Valentine's Day, Richard dies. And that's the bare facts that we get in the sources. So there's been lots and lots of speculation after that, but there's no real evidence to back up that speculation. But the speculation is that he starved to death. And then you get the two questions of whether Henry ordered him starved to death. Was it Henry's decision to withdraw food from him? Because you get that whole issue of you shouldn't inflict violence on a king. Henry will be aware he's going to have to show that body in public, so it shouldn't show signs of violence so that people will know he's murdered his predecessor and anointed King of England. Or the other possible explanation, if it was starvation, is that Richard goes on hunger strike. And I kind of see that as in fitting with his character, in keeping with his character. Imagine that this narcissistic idiot who's been told he's God's gift to the world almost from the day he was born, suddenly being kicked off the throne, and suddenly no one is listening to him at all. You know, he thinks at the end of the 1390s he's got his vengeance on everybody. He's doing the wicked mwahaha laugh, and all of a sudden the carpet's ripped from under him, and now nobody is listening to him. He's not king anymore. All of the things that made him special have been taken away from him. Someone like that, I think, would really struggle to cope with that. And you can almost imagine him being like a 5-year-old child. Fine, I'm going to starve myself to death then. And everyone around him going, okay. it's
all
like
right.
Captain Hook. It's like Captain Hook in Hook, isn't it? You know, stop me, Smee, stop me, Smee. And no one's stopping him from starving himself to death. So we don't know how Richard died. The speculation is starvation, possibly on Henry's orders, possibly he goes on hunger strike. But it's only about 3 days after his reported death on the 14th of February that his body is displayed at St. Paul's in London. So they rush it down there to put it on display and show to everyone. And then a couple of weeks after that, he is buried at King's Langley Priory. So again, out of the way of the royal mausoleums. Richard had a tomb commissioned for himself in Westminster Abbey, which his first wife, Anne of Bohemia, had been buried in. So he had planned to rest with her in Westminster Abbey in this tomb that he designed. Henry IV denies him that and has him buried at King's Langley Priory, albeit that in 1413, kind of the first year of Henry V's reign, spoiler, that's how long Henry IV lasts. That's where this episode is going to end. One of the first acts that Henry V undertakes is to move Richard's body from King's Langley Priory to Westminster Abbey, almost as a kind of little act of reconciliation, maybe to kind of, draw a curtain around all of this, say this is over, it's done, we move on. So Richard is in Westminster Abbey now with his first wife, Anne of Bohemia. But we also, much like the story of Edward II, although I think the evidence for this is less convincing and less compelling than the story of Edward II, there are loads and loads of stories that float around at the time and ever since that Richard II wasn't dead. In particular, there is a really persistent rumour that he's in Scotland, that he hasn't died, that he's got over the border to Scotland, and that he's going to return to England and take the throne back any minute now. Any minute. But he doesn't. He never does. I
was going to say, if anybody knows Richard II, there's no way he's going to go away quietly and wait for his moment. He would be making proclamations all over the place.
If he's alive, you wouldn't know about it.
Yeah, exactly.
But so Scotland has a regency government at this point, a young king, and the regency government, you have this man at Stirling Castle who they say is Richard II. They treat him as if he is the rightful king of England. Obviously, Scottish monarchs always have an interest in upsetting and annoying the king of England. But this man, he lives, he dies in 1419. So he lives for almost like 20 years after Richard is deposed. The Scots are saying that this guy is Richard II. People have suggested that he was a random beggar, that they just, stuck in a castle and was like, if you pretend to be Richard II, we'll give you some nice food all the time and you can sleep in a nice comfy bed. Some people have also suggested he might have been a man with mental health issues who was sort of almost tricked into believing he was Richard II or something like that. But when he dies in 1419, he's buried at Blackfriars at Stirling in, a tomb fit for a king. And that tomb is still there. He's buried in a really regal tomb. The Scots never kind of give up this idea that Richard II was alive there. And in England in the 1410s, so in the reign of Henry V, you're still getting people. There's one guy who's arrested and executed because he's wandering around the streets going, I know Richard II's still alive. Of course he is. He's coming back any minute now. So a dozen or so years after Richard is reportedly dead, there are still people being executed for saying he's not dead. He's alive. Wow. He's fine. Wow. So I think there's much less evidence for this than the stuff we discussed about Edward II still being alive. I think a lot of that is more compelling and more convincing than this. But it's interesting that you get this deposed king, this idea that he dies, but nobody knows how. Nobody really knows exactly when. And maybe he didn't die at all.
Okay,
despite the fact that his body is shown in London.
Is the tomb in Scotland labeled Richard II?
I don't actually know that. I think it is.
Weird.
I haven't seen it, but I know he gets buried at Blackfriars in this tomb that is described as being fit for a king.
Wow. And just, and it's just so typical too, like of a narcissist and a narcissist story. Even if he is dead, sometimes even we know he's dead, but even if he is dead, it's like he still finds a way to come back and haunt you.
He'd love it, wouldn't he? He'd love his afterlife.
Yes, he would. Okay, so where does the story go from here then? So people are still talking about Richard being alive. They're dying for this idea. What's going on with Henry IV at this time?
I mean, I think this is a really good illustration of, this is the first 6 months of Henry's reign. We talked today about the first 100 days, and it's like the first 100 days have not gone particularly well for Henry IV. This kind of sums up the tone and the problems that he's going to suffer for the rest of his reign. And Henry, before we get onto his actual reign, he's a really, really interesting character because before he becomes king, he's one of those people who, on paper, you would have bet good money on this guy making a great king. He seems to fulfill all of the things that Richard II has lacked. It's almost like Henry IV could have been the heir to the Black Prince that he never had. He could have been the heir to Edward III when he was at his height, in his pomp. He's the son of John of Gaunt, who's had all of these popularity problems, but Henry doesn't seem to share any of that at all. So he's the same age as Richard II. They're born in the same year. They both become Knights of the Garter at the same time. And I just throw that in again to point out that I'm jealous and I want to be a Knight of the Garter.
I think there's a petition going around for you. Good.
Let me know. Send me the link. I'll sign it 10 times. There's also one of the really interesting things is during the Peasants' Revolt, so the revolting peasants in 1381, we talked a lot about Richard II being at the Tower, his mum, having her bedroom invaded by all of those people that broke into the Tower. John of Gaunt was a target for the rebels, but he wasn't in London at the time. Well, his son Henry was in London. He was in the Tower of London at the time that the rebels broke into it. And there's a strong sense, he's 14, but he may well have been a target for the rebels had they found him. This is the time when they dragged the Archbishop of Canterbury and the treasurer out and cut their heads off outside the Tower. So he could have been in trouble. And we know what happens to him in the Tower because 20 years later when he's king, and again, early in his reign, this guy is brought in front of him for treason. And we get this report of kind of this boy's brought in front of Henry for treason, and Henry, squints his eyes at this guy, and he's like, do I know you? Have we met before? And this guy, whose name is John Ferrer, is like, you may remember me from such events as the Peasants' Revolt, sir. And it turns out that John and his wife, Joanna Ferrer, is one of the most interesting people in the Peasants' Revolt. All the documents describe her as the leader of the Peasants' Revolt. She's a woman and she's fascinating. But John Ferrer, it turns out, and his wife, Joanna, had bundled 14-year-old Henry into a cupboard in the Tower of London as the peasants were marauding through the tower, and kind of protected him and saved him from the mob. Wow. And 20 years later, Henry's like, yes, I remember you. You saved my life then. So only fair. I'll save yours now. Not guilty of treason. Off you go. And John Ferrer must have been like, yes, yes, finally it paid off being a rebel. And they seem like a couple. They seem like a bit of a dodgy couple, but also the kind of people who would fall on their feet at every available opportunity. So John gets caught for treason and pardoned because he'd saved the king's life 20 years earlier.
That's amazing.
But also, for a 14-year-old, probably quite a frightening experience to see them rampaging through the tower, being bundled into a cupboard, seeing them dragging other people out to kill them, and knowing that your dad is one of their prime targets. So possibly, a slightly scary experience for him. We also know that then as Richard grows up, so in 1390, as Henry grows up in kind of 1390, so when he's in his early 20s, he goes off with the Teutonic Knights to fight in the crusade against the pagans in the Baltics, in the northeast of Europe. As you do, it's like a winter thing. Later on they have the summer grand tour. During this period, they have the winter Baltic tour. There's a reason why we describe cold weather as being Baltic in this country, at least.
Interesting.
It's not a fun place to be in the winter, I wouldn't imagine. So he's with the Teutonic Knights, laying siege to places in the winter. None of it goes very well. He does that in 1390. He goes back again 2 years later in 1392, and takes like 100 men with him. And they again don't have a great deal of success. And I don't know whether he gets disillusioned with this, particularly with the cold weather, because at the end of 1392, when he leaves the Baltics, he heads for Jerusalem. Just a slight change in weather.
A little bit.
Yeah, so from 1392 to 1393, he goes on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, which seems to have affected him. It's something that will come back towards the end of his life. He will later on swear that he'll go on crusade to retake Jerusalem, but he never manages to. And on his way home, all of this is the benefits of his dad being absolutely loaded. He's just living the wealthy son lifestyle,
the entitled life.
Ferrari, taking the Ferrari on tour around Europe.
When you say Ferrari, you mean the nicest horse.
Yes, absolutely, the red horse,
named Ferrari.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No. On his way back from Jerusalem, he kind of makes his way up through Italy, and he's apparently making a huge impression on everyone. He's giving off real knightly vibes. This is a great lord who is lavishing money around everywhere. He's showing himself to be a great nobleman. Easy to do when your dad's rich. But, he's been on crusade. He's been on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He's showing himself to be a good soldier, a good knight, a good nobleman, all of those things. And it's during this period. So he's married by this point to Mary de Bohun, who actually dies in 1394, just after he gets back from crusade. But it's during this period that he comes to the attention of a woman named Lucia Visconti, who is famous for saying that if she could be sure that Henry would be available at some point, she would have waited to the very end of her life to marry Henry, even if she'd known that she would die 3 days after the wedding.
Wow, that's love right there. Yeah.
What, Henry? He's clearly got it going on. So the Italian women are swooning for Henry as well. He seems to have kind of everything on his side. And it's when he gets back to England, as we talked about in Richard's reign, at the end of the 1390s, Richard goes after the Lords Appellant, of which Henry was a kind of junior member, a bit of a latecomer. 1398, we get that instance with him and Mowbray of both accusing each other of effectively treason against the king. Richard orders a trial by combat, only to abandon it as they walk out onto the field and change his mind and send them both into exile. Mowbray for life and Henry initially for 5 years. He promises them they can inherit, their families, lands and titles and things, but the following year, John of Gaunt dies. Richard tries to take the inheritance into royal hands, and so Henry comes back to claim it, and that leads to the whole thing that will make him king. But what I'm trying to get at here is that we often have a poor view of Henry as a king. I think his reign does not go well. It kind of is disaster after disaster after disaster. But in 1399, he would have looked like a really, really good replacement for Richard. You'd be looking at him and thinking, why have we got that guy when we could have this guy?
Yeah.
He's the sparkly celebrity who looks like he's doing everything properly, in stark contrast to Richard. So all of the promise is there. The difficulty comes when he actually has to try and turn that into ruling as a king. And as we've seen, has the Epiphany rising early in his reign, the fact that John Ferrer is in front of him for treason within a year or two of that as well. Things are not going well.
Yeah. I feel like Henry IV is one of those kings that is so seldom spoken of. Like, I don't know what he did, but I don't know if he accomplished anything. I feel like there's so much that is not talked about when it comes to him, like he obviously he's the son of John of Gaunt, and he was willing to go out and fight and be a warrior and do those things, but it seems like he didn't have the type of upbringing that he should have had to become king. So maybe in that position, then he didn't really know how to navigate it.
Yeah, I think there's probably a little bit of that, although we've seen, the problems of Richard, who was very much brought up to be a king, and that made him a terrible, terrible king. Henry seemed to have all of the advantages. We talked a lot about Richard being the only child, so therefore, the only egg in the kingdom's basket for a long, long time. Henry is his father's oldest son, but he's surrounded by older half-siblings. He has older sisters and things like that. So he's probably brought up in a very different environment. He probably is used to the back and forth with siblings that Richard has never had. He's never had someone in a position to tell him off or whatever else in a way that siblings will do. So Henry has been brought up being exposed to those kinds of different things, but not raised to be a king. And then there is always the issue of, even when we saw Edward II being deposed, he was replaced by his son, who was undoubtedly his heir and would have been the next king anyway. The real problem that Henry faces is this is the first time in generations that the line of succession isn't what everybody expected. Now, Richard has no children, so no one's quite sure what to expect. There's an argument that the Mortimer family were his true heirs, that perhaps John of Gaunt had been doing his best to line up his family to be heirs if Richard didn't have any children. But it's unclear. And this is the first time a king of England has been deposed in this way and replaced with someone who's not his son. So Henry is in a uniquely difficult situation. He doesn't really have a template to look at for how to navigate all of this. And so I think he struggles and doesn't do a great job of it in the end.
Yeah. Okay, well, you mentioned his siblings, and I don't know why we were talking, and I keep saying John of Gaunt is his father, and it wasn't even clicking in my head that he has all these half siblings because of John of Gaunt's relationship with Catherine Swynford. Sometimes I amaze myself at the things that I forget. But so he's got all these half siblings. How are they supporting him while he's on the throne?
Interestingly, so he has kind of two full sisters. One is the Queen of Portugal, and the other is first married to the Earl of Pembroke and then the Duke of Exeter. So the Queen of Portugal, it's tricky for her to support him, although Portugal is England's oldest, longest standing ally, so it doesn't hurt to have his sister over there in his camp. His father's second wife, Constance of Castile, so he marries her essentially to try and further his claim to the throne of Castile. He only has one daughter with her, who is married to the King of Castile later on, so it's not overly contributing, but he's got allies on the Iberian Peninsula. And then it's really the Beauforts who are his half siblings by his father's third wife, Catherine Swynford, who, initially his mistress, later his third wife. The children are born out of wedlock, but later legitimised by the Pope and by an act of Parliament. And they seem to be, a pretty strong support for him. They are the kind of non-threatening brothers that he can have because they're half siblings. And there is this, so there's Nathan Amin has done some great research around all of this. If you go and look at the act that legitimised them, a later version of it, someone's kind of written in pencil in the margin about them not being able to ascend to the throne. But is a pencil margin note on an act of Parliament, is that legal? Probably not.
Is that legit?
Yeah, but the point is probably that someone is nevertheless being like, the Beauforts can't be kings. And that's quite possibly how Henry wants everyone to view them. They are a pillar of my reign. They're my half siblings, but they're not a threat to me.
Yeah.
And they won't come after me. And they will go on. The oldest of those, John Beaufort, is the ancestor of Margaret Beaufort of Henry Tudor fame. Thomas Beaufort, Duke of Exeter, will be a huge support to Henry V later on in the wars in France. He seems to have been a really good bloke and a really good soldier. Joan Beaufort goes on to marry Ralph Neville, the Earl of Westmoreland, and have like 457 children by him. And they are the ancestors of the House of York that later become kings. So the House of York has plenty of Beaufort blood in there as well. So he has these kind of allies that he can lean on, but not have to potentially worry too much about how much of a threat they're going to be to him. So for the most part, I think in terms of family, he's doing quite well. He doesn't have kind of too much of a threat around him, and he has plenty of support.
So, gosh, his reign sounds so boring. Is there anything exciting to tell me about him?
Nah, should we finish now?
Yeah, that was the quickest episode ever. Story is over.
Dawn. I mean, there's a couple of things that we can point to as either prestigious moments or successes. So really early in his reign, 1400 to 1401, so the first couple of years of his reign, he gets a visit from Emperor Manuel II, the Byzantine emperor, who is essentially coming looking for support for a crusade against the Ottomans, who are threatening the borders of the Byzantine Empire. And this is the only time that a Byzantine emperor ever comes to England. So this is quite a prestigious moment for Henry. He does a great job of hosting him, puts on jousts for him and everything else, lavishes him with hospitality. He stays kind of over the winter in England. I mean, that must have been an experience for Manuel. Welcome to an English winter. But ultimately, he's looking for help against the Ottomans, and Henry ultimately says, "Here's a bunch of money. Hope you enjoyed the jousts. Bye." He doesn't really give him any practical support or help. He just sends him away with a load of money. So that's for early in his reign. Contrasting that to the Epiphany Rising and the stuff we've talked about, there's a moment of prestige that he can look to build on, and say, I'm the only king of England who's ever brought an emperor of Byzantium here. Isn't that pretty cool? A few years after that, 1406, the child king of Scotland, he's 11 at this time, James I, he's captured by pirates while he's sailing, and the pirates sell him to the English. Cha-ching. So, I mean, is it a good thing that
these Scottish kings, they just have the worst track record, don't they?
I think especially James's, stop calling your kids James if they're going to be king of Scotland, because it doesn't tend to turn out too well. No. Captured by pirates, blown up by their own cannons, killed at Flodden, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Is it good that Henry is buying 11-year-old boys? I don't know. Make of that what you will. But again, it's a coup for the King of England to have the King of Scotland as a prisoner.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, he's an 11-year-old boy. Yes, there is still a regency government in Scotland. But James will be brought up with a really Anglophile outlook. You know, he remains an English prisoner until 1424, so into the reign of Henry VI.
Wow, I didn't know that.
He spends most of Henry IV's reign, the whole of Henry V's reign, and then the first couple of years of Henry VI's reign as an English prisoner before he goes back home. So after, 18 years as an English prisoner, he's kind of got a bit of an Anglophile outlook on things. But again, you know, that is a prestigious moment for the King of England to have the King of Scotland as a prisoner, keeping him around his court. When he's released and sent back to Scotland, he's married to Henry IV's cousin, Joan Beaufort. So not his half sister Joan Beaufort, another Joan Beaufort, because they're all Joan Beaufort, you know, all got the same name. So she's a Beaufort Queen of Scotland as well there. So, you know, she's the mother of a King of Scotland. So she's a precursor to Margaret Beaufort, putting Beauforts on the throne everywhere. So, you know, there is a decent political impact to some of the early stuff in Henry's reign, but then he has, I mean, again, to counter this is me desperately scratching around for nice positive things to say about Henry's reign, because it is nosedive downhill from here.
Oh no.
Yeah. One of his biggest problems comes in Wales, and this is the emergence from about 1400 of Owain Glyndŵr, who is absolutely fascinating character. He, despite his later kind of romantic, almost Arthurian, righteous warrior kind of myth that springs up around him, essentially he's local gentry. He's a minor baron in Wales, and he falls out with his English neighbour. You know, the English have had control of Wales by this point for just over 100 years, since Edward I took it. They've imposed English law and everything else, and the Welsh don't particularly like this. So Owain Glyndŵr falls out with his English neighbour over a property dispute, and his answer to this is to declare himself Prince of Wales and declare war on the King of England. Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course. Why not?
It's like, okay, Owain, you're having a bad day. Sit down, have a chocolate bar, cool your jets, and think about this.
Think this through, buddy.
Yeah. But no, he declares himself Prince of Wales, which no Welshman has been Prince of Wales since Llewellyn the Last in the 13th century. Yeah. And it's the title that is being used by heirs to the English throne. So it's very symbolic what he's doing. And this sparks the problem that English kings, with the exception of Edward I, have always had in Wales, is that you can't wage war in Wales, because the Welsh will just adopt these guerrilla tactics. They just disappear into the mist of the hills, and you can't find them and you can't fight them. So English armies tend to march around Wales till they run out of supplies, and then they have to call it quits. And then the Welsh come down from the hills and go, yay, off you go. Nice to see you. And Glyndŵr is great. You know, he leverages all of this, and he essentially spends pretty much the whole of Henry's reign causing trouble in Wales. It never comes to kind of pitch battle particularly. It's a whole load of sieges. He takes castles all over the place, Harlech and Aberystwyth and places like that. It's one of the first moments we see the Tudor family arrive at the fore of the Chronicles. So some of the ancestors of Henry Tudor, the uncles of Owen Tudor, take Conway Castle. So one of those big fortresses, this Welsh royal palace that Edward I built, a walled English town. They take it by, essentially they wait till it's a feast day. It might even have been Easter Sunday, when everybody is at church. There's a couple of guards left on the castle doors, and the Tudor brothers and a few of their men kind of turn up and be like, yeah, you know, we're the carpenters that are here to finish all the work on the castle. And the guards are like, okay, sounds totally legit. Let them in. And as soon as they're inside, they take the guards hostage, kill the guards, and open the doors to the rest of their men. And the Tudor brothers and a bunch of their men hold the castle for months and months and months. In the end, they actually negotiate terms with Henry IV, by which the Tudor brothers and the other leaders will be allowed to leave if they give up like a dozen of their men to be executed as examples. And this is what the Tudors are like for you. because they do it. They just hand over a bunch of their men to be hanged by the English so that they can all go free and get away. Which is not really a way to inspire long-term loyalty, is it?
No, it's not good.
But you've got all of these things going on, and I think what Owain Glyndŵr is doing is he's tapping into that lingering Welsh sense of nationalism and of not liking what the English have done. Yes, it's been a century, but it's also only been a century. Owain Glyndŵr says, I'm going to reinstate the ancient laws of the Welsh, which the English have swept away and replaced with English laws. He talks, he writes in 1406, he writes something called the Penal Letter from Penal near Machynlleth. So he holds a Welsh parliament at Machynlleth in Wales. And he writes this Penal Letter to the King of France, essentially asking for military help. And during all of this, he talks about establishing 2 universities in Wales, because he says, the English won't let us have a university here. But if I'm Prince of Wales, it's like his manifesto. I'm gonna reinstate the ancient laws of the Welsh people. We'll have a university in North Wales and a university in South Wales, and all of these kinds of things. So, and the French king seems to be like, that all sounds absolutely great. Here's like 5 men. Do with them as you will. He sends over like a tiny little force to go and help Owain, which is just nowhere near enough to help him against the English, really. It's a bit of a token gesture, which again, the French king, if the English king is diverted in Wales, that's absolutely great. So it's probably not enough to actually cause any real problems for Henry, but enough to keep him distracted, and that serves the King of France. But skipping back a tiny little bit, so Owain Glyndŵr starts all of this in 1400. By 1403, Henry is also facing a rebellion by the Percy family in the north of England, so the Earls of Northumberland, who, again, carry on into the Tudor period, that same family. And Henry Hotspur Percy is a really famous soldier. He has been helping Henry IV in Wales to suppress this rebellion. But the Percy family increasingly become disaffected with Henry's government. They feel like they deserve more for the support that they gave Henry early on. They feel like they helped to make him a king and they're not getting their own way, and Henry is not being particularly good to them. And they end up going into rebellion. So the actual Earl of Northumberland, Henry Percy, doesn't seem to get too involved in this, but his brother, the Earl of Worcester, does. And his oldest son, also called Henry Percy, because aren't they all, who's known as Hotspur, does get involved in this rebellion. And they kind of march to Wales with the intention of meeting up with Owain Glyndŵr. And the Percys and Owain Glyndŵr and also representatives of the Mortimer family, who talked about as the other potential heirs to the English throne against Henry IV, come up with this, what's known as the tripartite agreement. So between the 3 of them, they come up with this agreement. And what it essentially says is that Owain will become King of Wales, a slightly larger Wales, expanded over the border a little bit. The Percys will become the kings of the north of England, and the Mortimers will become kings of the south of England. And this agreement envisages a permanent split in 3 of England and Wales. So this could have been the end of England as a single kingdom if they got their own way. And they actually designate the point at which the 3 kingdoms will meet, and this is where they'll go to settle any arguments or disputes or have any meetings about it or whatever else. And they pinpoint it at a place that is exactly half a mile down the road from me.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Which is very cool. I bored our postman almost to death when I told him about this, because he didn't know. He'd been delivering on this route for over 40 years and he didn't know this. And I was like, well, let me tell you. And he was like, anyway, I've got to go.
From experience, I know how much people love it when you go, did you know?
He was running. I was chasing him up the drive in his van and still trying to tell him. It's almost like he didn't want to hear it.
He had a blowhorn. You're yelling at me.
Yeah, I just recorded it for him and gave it him on CD the next time. I was like, just listen to this on your round.
He's like, okay, yep, sure.
Yep, I saw him frisbee out the window when he got to the end of the drive. But yeah, so, there's a local bit of interest. But yeah, in 1403, the Percys are marching south, and Henry IV, along with his son, Henry of Monmouth, as the prince is mostly known at this point because he's born at Monmouth in Wales, intercept them at the Battle of Shrewsbury. and Henry Hotspur is killed. The rebels are kind of defeated before they get the chance to meet up with Owain Glyndŵr. So who knows what might have happened if those two forces had come together.
Yeah.
Henry might have been in real trouble, but the stroke of military genius there is to move fast and intercept them before they can join up. He defeats the Percys. Hotspur is killed. The Earl of Worcester is executed later on. But this continuing war throughout his reign with Wales means that he's always got one eye there. Kings of England always want to go on at war with France or be making treaties maybe on the Iberian Peninsula where all his sisters are queens and all of that kind of thing. He is endlessly unable to do any of that stuff because he's always got one eye on Wales. His son, Henry of Monmouth, this is where we see Henry V cutting his military teeth. He's involved in that effort in Wales. He's 16 at the Battle of Shrewsbury and gets hit in the face by an arrow. Maybe we'll talk about that in the next episode. But from 16 onwards, he's almost permanently in Wales, leading this military effort, and he's constantly writing letters back to his dad saying, "You have got to give me the men and the money that I need to get this over the line to a conclusion." And Henry IV is constantly writing back, going, "I'll see what I can do," and never sending anything.
Oh no.
So Henry of Monmouth kind of really struggles with all of this, and this has a huge impact on the man who will lead that Agincourt campaign, those efforts into France, man who understands supply chains and things like that, because he's seen it. He's seen what happens when that doesn't work, when those plans aren't in place. And so Henry IV kind of never really invests enough in Wales to get it done, and it means that it distracts him for the whole of his reign, really. And I mean, and this is all before we get on to another big rebellion that leads him to execute an archbishop.
Oh gosh, here we go. I just feel like let's talk about Wales just for a second here, because it seems like all the episodes that we've done, Wales is like the loose cannon, right? And that anybody who goes into Wales struggles, except for Edward I, I guess, but still, it wasn't easy. And then people just keep trying their best to invade Wales and to do what they can. And you keep talking about this guerrilla warfare. And no wonder Henry IV was like, yeah, let me see what I can do. And he's like, this is going to cost us a lot of money because we already know we're not going to win this. How can we win this?
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible that militarily he knew he couldn't win that war. What he needed to do was just keep a lid on it. But keeping a lid on it just means you are constantly feeding some resources there, not enough to win it. And maybe he thought it would fizzle out in a couple of years, but it ends up going on really throughout the whole of his reign. Owain Glyndŵr disappears from the historical record in 1412, so the year before Henry IV dies. And by this point, he's turned down 2 royal pardons. He said, no, thank you. But Henry is beginning to offer royal pardons that are starting to leech Glyndŵr's support a little bit. But yeah, so Owain, he just vanishes in 1412. Nobody knows. There's an assumption that he dies in 1416 because there's some reference to letters being written to him that he doesn't reply to and things like that. But he also becomes part of the Welsh bards and things are. I've heard a storyteller at Harlech Castle kind of sit down and regale kids for half an hour with stories of how the English tried to capture Owain Glyndŵr and they could never get him. And then he disappears, and is he out there in the mists of the Welsh mountain like another King Arthur, waiting to come back and liberate Wales? So he becomes this real folklore hero because nobody knows what happens to him, and it's almost like Henry has allowed him to take on that mythical status by failing to engage properly with him. Maybe Henry thought, I can't win that war. I'll give it a couple of years and it'll fizzle out. But at the end of that couple of years, you would have thought maybe he'd have thought, I'm going to have to throw some serious resource at this and get it done. Let's go and see what Edward I did that worked. And let's see if we can do it and get this over with. Because I can't focus on anything else while they keep causing me trouble in Wales.
Yeah. They're like, let's go back to the archives and the battle plans for Edward and see what happened.
Yeah, why not? But I think it's that mix of never quite putting enough into it to succeed, but a little bit too much to fail. That means it just goes on for essentially the whole of his reign.
Oh, Okay, well, I guess now you have to tell me about the archbishop that he killed because now I'm thinking Thomas Becket a little bit. I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, this is the thing. How many times do you hear about archbishops getting killed by kings? I mean, Thomas Becket has the whole did Henry or didn't Henry say that he wanted him done away with? There is absolutely no doubt about what happens here. So this revolves around a man named Richard le Scrope. I say Scrope, some say Scroop. Let's call the whole thing off. He's Archbishop of York. So not Archbishop of Canterbury, but Archbishop of York. And he's quite close to the Percy family. Doesn't seem to get too wrapped up in that 1403 rebellion, sort of escapes from that unscathed. But in 1405, he and a few others do join in a rebellion. And the sources tell us that they raise about 8,000 men and they march on York. The Earl of Northumberland does join in this time. The Earl of Norfolk joins him. And essentially, again, they're complaining about the rule of Henry IV and the things that they believe he's doing wrong. And they meet with the Earl of Westmoreland, Ralph Neville, and they have a bit of a parley. Ralph Neville listens to their complaints and says, you know what, I speak for the king. I agree. You'll get what you want. We'll get these things sorted out. And so the rebel bunch disband their men and send them home. And unsurprisingly, perhaps, Ralph Neville has them all arrested as soon as their men are gone. And there are a number of points at which this becomes increasingly kind of uncomfortable to a 15th century ear. He's arrested an Archbishop of York. I mean, okay, you can maybe arrest them as secular lords. You know, he's engaging in a secular activities, raising armies. You know, they are landowners and things like that. But arresting an Archbishop of York is still, it's a little bit dodgy. It's slightly frowned upon. Henry then goes on to deny them trial by jury.
Oh.
Which they're entitled to under Magna Carta.
Uh-oh.
So all of the men associated, Henry is like, no trial. What I'm going to do is I'm going to appoint a panel and they're going to decide whether you're guilty or innocent. And Henry's Chief Justice at this point is a man named William Gascoigne. And William Gascoigne, the Chief Justice of England, is like, I am having nothing to do with this. Count me out.
So
I don't want anything to do with it.
This is like an act of attainder, basically.
Yeah. So essentially he's going to have them tried for treason, but not in front of a jury. They're not going to be allowed to make their own case. He's appointed a panel who he's probably given very clear instructions to. And his own Chief Justice is like, you can't do this. I'm not getting involved in this at all, particularly against an archbishop. Absolutely not. So Henry kind of appoints his own panel, moves ahead with it all. Unsurprisingly, they're all found guilty of high treason by Henry's panel. On the 8th of June, 1405, Archbishop Scrope is executed outside the walls of the city of York. There's a report that he requested 5 strikes of the axe to replicate the 5 wounds of Christ. He is then buried in York Minster as an Archbishop of York. And quite quickly, a cult grows up around him. You know, he was considered by some to be a saint and a martyr, that he died for his religion. The Pope excommunicates everybody involved in all of this. And probably William Gascoigne is like, well, I'm glad I wasn't involved. But interestingly, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Arundel, refuses to publish the Pope's bull of excommunication. So essentially he's like, nah, Pope didn't say that.
Didn't happen.
It doesn't count. Yeah. And it takes until 1407, kind of a couple of years after the execution, that the Pope's successor, the Pope that excommunicated Henry, dies, and his successor eventually pardons Henry. So there's a little bit of the kind of Henry II story in there, except there is absolutely no doubt that Henry wanted this archbishop dead. Wow. He wanted this guy's head cut off. And that is a really, really shocking moment in medieval history that quite often gets overlooked in the whole mess of Henry's reign. You know, probably to a medieval listener, the most significant thing you've heard so far is that he executed an archbishop. That is like top tier no-no.
Yeah, I'm kind of stunned by the whole thing. Like it was intentional. It wasn't like you said, it wasn't like Henry II, did he or didn't he say those words?
No.
Did he convince them to kill Thomas Becket? This case, it seems pretty obvious that this was all the plan.
Yeah, there's no kind of get out of jail free card. There's no fudging the words. You know, his chief justice has said you can't do this, and Henry's like, just watch me, hold my ale.
Wow.
I'm off to do this. But again, you know, is he thinking these things through? Because if you execute an archbishop, you are always in danger of creating a martyr, and people will see miracles in his name, which will necessarily put him in opposition to you. So, do you really want to be in opposition to a saint and a martyr? Probably not.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe we can question some of Henry's judgment in some of these things, but by 1405, you know, he's got an awful lot going on. Nothing has really gone his way for the whole of his reign. By this point, he's had the Epiphany Rising, the death of Richard II, the Battle of Shrewsbury, Owen Glyndŵr is still going on in Wales, and now he's got a rebellion by these northern lords as well. And I wonder whether in his mind it's just like, you know, I've got to execute them all, and I kind of don't care that one of them's an archbishop.
Oh my gosh.
Why should he get away with it?
I don't even know what to think about all of it. I feel like I say this every episode, but you know, Henry IV, like when we started and we talked about him last episode, you know, coming to England, his intent wasn't to become king, but then it was kind of presented to him and he was like, okay, why not? And then we get into his reign and then he essentially murders an archbishop and he's not helping his son while his son is fighting in Wales. You know, what did he do that was good? Because right now I'm not feeling very good about Henry IV's reign right now.
No, I mean, do you remember that shiny visit from the Emperor of Byzantium? Remember that, guys? That was really good. That was a great time. I mean, again, you know, his problems just go from bad to worse and become amplified because from 1405 onwards, Henry also becomes increasingly ill. And lots of medieval commentators see this as God's immediate vengeance on him for executing an archbishop.
Oh, yeah.
He develops a disfiguring skin disease. It's been speculated that this was leprosy. It could have been some form of psoriasis or something like that. But he has real problems with that. And this is an issue for him because as a medieval king, the ideal is that you are physically perfect. That, you know, you will often see medieval kings described as being handsome and strong and all of these kinds of things. And one of the ways earlier in the medieval period, not so much by this point, one of the ways that you dealt with your political rivals was to physically disfigure them. So blinding was quite often a way that in the early medieval period that people would deal with rivals, because there is this idea that if you're not physically perfect, you're not God's chosen. You know, God isn't going to choose someone who isn't physically perfect to be the king. So as this skin condition begins to take hold, in the wake of the execution of the Archbishop of York, everyone is like, there's no way in which this is good news, is there?
This is a curse on you, pox on you.
And alongside this skin condition, he has something else going on that is debilitating, that rears its head in kind of 1405, 1406, 1408, into 1409, and then again in 1412, and the kind of last recurrence of it in March 1413 is what will bring towards a close all of his life. And people are less certain about what this was. So there's been some suggestion it could have been something like epilepsy, but he seems to have times when he just kind of vanishes from government and isn't around at all. During this period, he pays his physician £40 a year on the condition that he doesn't work for anybody else. So he's always at Henry's beck and call, which suggests he needs the constant attention of this physician by now. Something is very, very seriously wrong with his health. So we can't be entirely sure what either the skin condition was or the other condition that is plaguing him, but we can be pretty clear that it's debilitating and it's causing him kind of real problems. His son, Henry of Monmouth, begins to take an increasing role in government. You know, when his father disappears, it's natural that the Prince of Wales sort of steps in. But Henry IV seems to resent his son for doing this. And as soon as he's back in power, he's you know, very, greedily snatching back the reins of power from Henry. And there's no kind of, thank you very much, son, I'm back and I'm okay now. It's kind of, what were you up to while I wasn't here? And he's almost suspicious of his own son, which again may be a side effect of the illnesses that he's suffering, may be a result of the manner in which he has come to the throne himself, that he fears being deposed. But he seems to be increasingly suspicious and at odds with his own son and heir, which is another not a good look for a medieval king.
No.
And there were prophecies that reported that said that Henry had reportedly heard these prophecies that he would die in Jerusalem. So he'd promised to go on crusade to try and free Jerusalem, or restore it to the Christians. But he never manages to do that. And during his last illness in March 1413, he goes into the abbot's house at Westminster Abbey, and he dies on the 20th of March. And reportedly, as he's laying there in his last moments, he realizes that he's lying in the Jerusalem chamber at Westminster Abbey abbot's house. So he sort of fulfilled the prophecy. He died in Jerusalem ... brackets chamber. So there's maybe something like that. And then, I mean, the final decision that he makes is, again, another very interesting one. He's buried at Canterbury Cathedral. So not Westminster Abbey, where all of the other medieval kings of England have been being buried. He's denied Richard II burial there at this point. And Edward II is at Gloucester because he was deposed. But he makes this decision to have himself buried at Canterbury Cathedral and not Westminster. And it's quite hard to understand exactly what that is about. One of the only other really significant people buried at Canterbury from this period is the Black Prince, who is Henry's uncle. Is he somehow trying to connect himself there? He's deposed the Black Prince's son. Is this kind of some sort of act of contrition? I don't know. The cult of Thomas Becket is still huge at this point. Thomas Becket is still the most significant saint in England during this period. So is he trying to associate himself with the cult of Becket? I mean, brave for a man who ordered the execution of an archbishop. Yeah. Maybe he realizes he needs forgiveness in the same way that Becket reportedly gives it to Henry through the miracles that are associated with Henry's visits to Becket's shrine. So is this an admission that he needs a bit more help than other medieval kings do with some of the sins that he's committed? So it kind of brings to an end a really troubled reign, that there's so few positives to talk about and so many things that we're not sure about, including that last decision to be buried at Canterbury. And I guess the last thing to say about that is, so a couple of centuries ago, when they were big on opening tombs and looking at what was inside, they opened Henry IV's tomb, so he's buried there, and kind of mummified and everything else. So they opened the tomb, they cut open the bandages on his face, and they went, "Oh, isn't his face incredibly well preserved?" And then his face disintegrated in contact with the oxygen. So apparently his body was very well preserved for several hundred years afterwards, but isn't anymore because of them opening tombs without knowing what they were doing.
It's like we hear that story so often with them opening tombs and finding the flesh still intact. It's like, just leave them, just let them be. Like, you just ruined everything.
Exactly. Wouldn't it be great if future generations could see the face of this English king? Oh, sorry, too late.
Yeah, sorry about that. Honestly, there was a similar story about Henry VIII's last wife, Catherine Parr, too, when her grave was desecrated and they unwrapped her and, said her skin was so fair and beautiful, and it wasn't anymore. It's too bad. And most of those were in the 18th century, 19th century?
Yeah, they're kind of big on it in the late 18th and early 19th century. Yeah. All these antiquaries just go around, crack open tombs and measure them. And, it's how we know how tall a lot of these kings were, because they measure their skeletons in the grave. They draw sketches of a lot of them and things like that, but they clearly didn't know precisely what they were doing in dealing with these things. I think we'd probably be a bit more careful today if we did it. Yeah.
I guess I'm grateful that we know how tall some of these people were, but I could have survived without knowing too.
Yeah, that's it. Was it worth the the opening of their tomb and in some cases the destruction of their remains.
Yeah.
Just to learn that.
I honestly, here I am again at the end of an episode saying, I don't know how I feel about this king. I feel like Henry III was one where I went in going, he seems boring. And then I was intrigued by the story. And now Henry IV, I thought, this is going to be good, right? Because the whole Richard II thing. And then we get into the story and I'm like, I'm really not so sure about this guy. This whole, his reign, I mean, it wasn't that long, but it was long enough. But also, like, I just don't feel like anything super positive came out of it other than Henry V.
Yeah. I mean, it is, it's 14 years of almost constant unrest, uprisings, problems for Henry to have to deal with. He's playing whack-a-mole for the whole of his reign. Every time he knocks down one problem, another one pops up somewhere. Yeah. And I think it's the story of all of that potential that on paper in 1399, if you looked at his CV, if you were looking for a new king of England and the CVs came in, you'd probably pick out Henry's and you'd be like, well, this guy is crusader with the Teutonic Knights. He's been on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Yeah. The Italian ladies love him. He's rich. He's been brought up. He impresses everybody everywhere that he goes. He's got military experience. He knows how to, John of Gaunt teaches him very, very well how to run estates and things like that because he would be the next Duke of Lancaster. So he has all of that kind of education. I think it's the CV that you would pick out and you would put on top and you would say, this might be my man for the next king. And he kind of first day at work and he trips up the stairs, spills his coffee all over you and you're like, ooh, this is not what I was expecting.
This is not who I hired.
No, he's very different from his CV.
I mean, in fairness, that happens nowadays too. So, well, this has been. I usually say it's a roller coaster of emotions, but I feel like today Henry IV bored me. I'm bored with him.
The roller coaster has just been going down and down and down.
I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rank Henry IV as king? 1 being terrible, King John, or 10 being fantastic, and I don't yet have an example for that.
I mean, I would struggle to give him more than a 3. I mean, a 4 if I was being nice, because he's not as vile a person as someone like John, or Richard II's personality is troublesome. He's not as ineffective as someone like Edward II, maybe. But he also clearly doesn't make a very good job of being king, doesn't manage to deal comprehensively with the problems that he faces. And the fact that problems keep cropping up is probably an indicator that he's not doing a very good job. I guess the only thing you can say in his favour as a king is that he dies in his bed, still as king, and his son succeeds him. So he achieves something that a medieval king is supposed to achieve. But I'd struggle to give him more than a 4 if I was being generous.
I feel like we have this saying over here, like when somebody is boring or dull or doesn't give much, we would say that they're like a vanilla milkshake. I think Henry IV.
I thought you were going to say they're Matthew Lewis, but no.
Should have. That would have been so much better. We have this saying over here. I started that saying. But I feel like Henry IV is the vanilla milkshake of medieval kings.
Yeah, but also he's ever so slightly gone off. It's like, this is the last day you could drink that milkshake.
Yeah, right before it
does
curdles.
you some damage. He's not a great vanilla milkshake.
That's my title for this episode. Not a great vanilla milkshake. Oh, Matt, this has been so fun again, learning about these kings from medieval history with you as we kind of go through the timeline. Next up, we're going to talk about Henry V, and we're getting closer and closer to the end, aren't we? I'm starting to feel kind of sad. I know I tease you about coming back, but I feel sad that this series is coming close to an end. Do you feel the same?
I mean, no, if you keep these insults up, I think we should just do all of them next time.
We'll do the remainder. Yeah.
We'll just speed run through the House of Lancaster and the House of York to the end. No, I've been really, really enjoying this. It's been a great way to kind of tell that whole continuing narrative through all the stories to see the different personalities of the kings and the problems they faced and how they dealt with them all. I've enjoyed doing it. So even if nobody's enjoying listening, I'm enjoying doing it.
Well, might I suggest, after doing all of these with you, I'm going to make a suggestion for you now that you write a book about this, because clearly you have knowledge on the subject. And I know to write a book, obviously, you're going to have to go a little bit deeper. But I think you have enough so far to be able to write a book on medieval kings. What do you think?
Should we just get the transcript from the podcasts and send it off to a publisher?
we can do that. Yes. We can.
Slightly cheating, but let's do it.
Just cut out Rebecca laughter, cut out Rebecca's questions. Just
No,
Rebecca's
that
out.
in. That's the best bits.
No, it's not. Oh, gosh. Well, thank you again so much for joining me. And next time we'll come back to talk about Henry V. And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. This podcast would not be possible without the wonderful support of my generous Patreon patrons. If you'd like to become a patron, you get commercial-free episodes, early access, and exclusive content. Head over to Patreon, that's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty for more information. Until next time,